start with, I would like to invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so and think, what is your favorite food? What food brings you comfort? What foods evoke memories of family and well-being? I put a chicken in the crock pot not long ago. The first time I ever did this, and I let it cook all day. My house smelled like Grandma's house when I was a child. It reminded me of a time for family coming together. What foods do you think of? I invite you to go ahead and open your eyes. Does anybody want to share what came to mind?
Apple pie.
Apple pie. You have a special memory with apple pie?
My mother was very good making apple pie.
Okay, okay. Anybody else?
My grandma always let me punch in the dough after it rained.
Uh-huh.
Oh, for bread?
Yeah.
Punching in that dough after it rains, okay.
And then eating the bread.
Eating the bread. I remember walking into Grandma's house and the smell of fresh baked bread, and then slicing it and putting butter on it and having it melt. Yeah. Anybody else want to share?
I always had the job of mashing the potatoes at Grandma's house. That was, you know, and of course, these real potatoes and real butter.
Yes.
Nothing instant, you know.
Yes, real potatoes and real
Yeah,
butter.
yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Well, we each have connections to food, and many different kinds of connections. There are emotional connections. We just experienced that a little bit. Some foods take us back to happy times or even tough times in our lives. I know a Vietnam vet who will not eat rice because of memories connected to that particular food. Donuts. Donuts. What memories I have of donuts. My siblings and I knew that Mom was in a good mood if we got donuts for breakfast. Money was tight, donuts were a treat. Some of us eat to keep from feeling feelings. It's called stuffing our feelings, holding them down, holding back tears by eating. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of emotional connections to food. There are also health connections to food. We, of course, need food to survive. We need healthy food for healthy bodies. And some of us do this better than others, I know that. I saw a video once of a healthy eater who peeled an apple every morning for his breakfast. And he threw away the meaty part of the apple and ate the skins, because he said that was the healthier part of the fruit. I do mine the other way. I peel off the skin and eat the meaty part. But he claims that the peel was the healthy part. We all know about what's good to eat and what's not. And according to the internet, some of the information keeps changing, like, are eggs good for us or not? What about bananas or protein in the form of meat? Yeah, we all have health connections to food or questions about food. We also have family connections to food. Unfortunately, families are not sitting around the table eating meals together like they used to as much when I was growing up. I admit some memories of sitting at the table long after everybody else left because my mom made me sit there till I ate the green beans. Once my brother ate them for me and I was very thankful for him. Families do still come together for Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners, for celebrations, and it's Grandma's apple pie or Uncle Mike's barbecue ribs that we remember and long for after those family members are gone. In my daughter's husband's family, his mom, Grandma Helen, makes cinnamon rolls, and everybody loves it when Grandma Helen makes cinnamon rolls. The interesting thing is that the recipe's long gone. It's all in her head. and she's never shared it with anybody. It's her secret. It's gonna die with her. Because only one of her 3 close granddaughters, and I think she's got, I'm not sure how many grandchildren. She's got 6 kids, so there's a lot of grandchildren. Only one of the 3, my granddaughters, has ever seen her make them, let alone know the recipe. So that recipe's, if she doesn't write it down, it's gonna be lost. It's also true that these family gatherings are stressful for some people. For some, it might be easier not to be with family, especially during the holidays. There's also community connections to food. There are many social functions that happen around food. We go to lunch with a friend. We have birthday parties and weddings and funerals, and food is usually involved. I think of the meal that you're all planning for after the hanging of the greens next Sunday, or the meals that you share at the annual retreat. You plan who's going to bring what, and sometimes it's a surprise what people bring. Communities have meals. The last church I served had a monthly meal. It was a fundraiser for the youth, but it was open to everybody in town, a community of about 650, and a lot of people came, and it was the only time they saw their friends, and they would sit at the table and eat with them. They'd donate money for the food, but they enjoyed sitting and talking. I know that the Catholic Church in Pratt has an annual fish fry. There's also an annual Thanksgiving dinner that's going to happen at the municipal building this week. And there's more that I'm sure that I'm not even aware of. And I'm pretty sure that Pretty Prairie has some functions that include food. I'm guessing at least the rodeo would have some kind of food involved. Maybe hot dogs or nachos or something that people eat and sit and watch the rodeo. Our food also connects us to the land. There's a strong connection to the land, whether it's an apple or an orange from a tree, potatoes or carrots from the ground, or the beef, pork, chicken, turkeys that we eat. It's because of the land, the ground, that these things are available to us. Before a meal, we often bow our heads and we're reminded of our ultimate dependence on God's provision for this life, our dependence on a farmer's weathered hands and earthly knowledge, our dependence on healthy soils and blessed rainfall. We are reminded of an everyday miracle. If we take a tiny seed in our hands, drop it in a shallow furrow of rich soil with adequate sunlight and water, we get a bountiful harvest of food. That one little seed, and so much can come from it. I'm reminded of a clergy friend who lived in Leota, Kansas for a while, and she told me that towards the end of the summer, she started locking her car when she was downtown, because if she didn't, people would put zucchini in the back of her car. They just opened the door and put it in there, knowing that she wanted it, because they had an abundance of it. Full shelves in the supermarket and meals on the table are not inevitable conclusions. The abundance of food depends upon producers that care for the land. That abundance also depends on the health of God's creation. By eating with these 3 things in mind, the producers, the land, and God, we nurture our gratitude during meals. As author Sharon Parks says, we are reminded of our utter dependence upon the generosity of the earth and its peoples and the power and grace by which our lives are sustained. The holiness of food, perhaps seen most clearly in the Christian sacrament of communion, the Lord's Supper. That's where we can see it most clearly. Around the table, a shared table of communion, we take and bless the everyday elements of bread and wine. These very simple items, these common elements, signify Christ's life, death, and resurrection, and they remind us of God's provision of our daily bread. It would be well to approach our dinner tables just as we approach the Lord's table, reverently and fully aware of the implications of our meal. Eating, then, is one expression of our faith. The choices that we make every day about food may seem mundane and unimportant, but we can be richly blessed with sacramental moments as we consume our food in a certain way, with more awareness than ignorance, with more love than greed, with more reverence than inattention. When our daily bread is experienced and respected for the sacrament that it is, then we all have so much to be thankful for. I have a clergy sister who, when she goes out for a meal with friends and there's a basket of bread or a basket of chips on the table, she'll take a roll or a slice of bread or a chip and she'll offer the sense of sacredness of the meal, an awareness of God's presence right there at the table. It's not done with any fanfare. There's no big production. It just feels like a form of communion, being at the Lord's table in a restaurant in the midst of other people. She invites everyone else to take a piece of bread or a chip, and she says some words about God's presence with them as they eat and share together. And you know what? It doesn't take a clergy person to make this sense of sacrament happen at a meal. A question for us today is, are we aware of the profound blessing to be found in each bite of food? Eating is the consummate whole experience. It's an act of survival. We eat to stay alive. It's an act of pleasure. We can enjoy each and every bite. It's an act of community. We can each rejoice in the companionship eating brings into our lives. Even if we're alone at the table, as some of us are more often than not, I lost my place. Even if we're alone at the table, we can be thankful for those who have been with us or will be with us, or even of that great cloud of witnesses that surround us at all times, even when we're sitting alone at the table. Eating food is also an act of spiritual renewal as we awaken to a deeper awareness of God's presence and blessing in our food. It is Christ as the good bread. We remember Jesus saying, "I am the bread of life." We can offer the bread of life to one another as we give and receive communion here in this church, like we did the last time. Jesus as the bread is a powerful metaphor for a food that is life-giving, life-sustaining, and community-building. In John 6:35, Jesus says, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." And as I said earlier, Jesus said these words after feeding of the 5,000 in the Gospel according to John. He wants his disciples to understand that it is more than the food we take through our mouths that's important. He's offering himself, his very presence, as a means of giving life to people. As we consider the life-giving presence of Christ as we sit at a meal, not just at the Lord's table on Communion Sunday, not just at the bounty-laden table of Thanksgiving Day or a holiday or a birthday or a backyard barbecue, but every day, we can better understand the importance of working with Jesus in his desire to eternally and sustainably feed the world. Christ, as the good bread, keeps us mindful of the many connections and relationships that sustain us. That's life-giving, that's life-sustaining. Just as we live in Christ, we also exist as a part of the natural world. Through the bread of life, we become aware of our relationship with farmers, grains and living soils, with the rain, the sun, pollination, and all the elements involved in our food production. Creation has been teaching us about God's ways since the very beginning. God works in community, not just a community of people, but involving all of the elements of creation to provide bread or manna for all God's creation and to make all of life possible. When all of creation becomes aware of God's providential presence, together we sing for joy. Like in Psalm 65, the pastures of the wilderness overflow. The hills gird themselves with joy. The meadows clothe themselves with flocks. The valleys deck themselves with grain. They shout and sing together for joy. Our praise has been interrupted, though. In some ways, we're losing our capability of knowing God while God's creative world is being destroyed. Water no longer flows clear in rivers and over pastures and in fields. Therefore, the land, all of creation, cannot provide healthy loaves and fish every place, everywhere. Seeds have been robbed of their eternally life-giving properties and turned into infertile commodities that can only be found in the marketplace. You know, I have a Native American friend she introduced me to the seed pot. Are you familiar with that? The Native Americans would collect seeds at harvest time and ceremonially place them into a seed pot made of like clay, usually, and it's to protect the seeds from spoilage over the winter time. These pots were considered sacred. They were holding the seeds of life for the next year. And then before the next planting season, the members of the tribe would go to a nearby body of water and perform the forgiveness ceremony. This friend came to the retreat center, and we did this 2 years in a row, had a forgiveness ceremony, and each woman that was there knelt at the edge of the creek and asked forgiveness for anything that had been going on in her life. And it was cold. We did it like in March, and she would splash the cold water on her face, and then she would stand up, and there would be somebody there with a towel to dry her, so she could dry herself off, and then we would just hug one another. And each woman had an opportunity to do this. And this is what they would do in the native tribes. They wanted to cleanse themselves and the whole tribe of any ill feelings they had toward one another that may have built up over the winter months of living more closely together. And then they would crack open their seed pots, and begin the New Year's planting season. The seeds were so sacred, the native people wanted no bad vibes to impact these seeds. They didn't want any ill feelings, no hardness of heart taken into the fields while they were planting. Jeremiah 29:5-6a says, this was to the Israelites, "Build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat what they produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." We, just like the Israelites in this Jeremiah passage, are invited to seek the welfare of the city where God has sent us. We seek the welfare of the land and of its peoples. We don't know how to care for creation as perfectly as God does, but we can build a relationship with the land and with the people around the land that we meet. God invited the Israelite exiles into Babylon. That's where the Israelites are in this Jeremiah passage, in exile. God says to till and keep the land, just as they had done in the promised land. When we begin to relate to the land we live in, love begins to grow and relationships are developed. Kinder relationships with folks around us can happen. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm not sure. Maybe many of you have had or have gardens. Maybe you've had hand-on experiences of dressing chickens or raising cattle. I don't know for sure. I think there is a greater awareness of the connection between earth and food in rural areas of Kansas than in the city. A greater awareness of the importance of taking care of the land. A greater awareness of the need for clean water and healthy soil. Jane Koger, who was the ranch owner at the retreat center where I had tall grass, she didn't consider herself a cattle rancher. She considered herself a soil manager, because without the good soil, she couldn't have the cattle on it. So the soil was her main, I hate to say product, but that was the main thing that she was involved with. I wonder how many of us at the table, the Lord's table with a little T, at our everyday meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, are aware of what all it took to get that food to the table, and how we are related to the earth, the sun, the rain, the growers, the producers, and the processors of the food. My daughter and her husband raise cattle and hogs and chickens, and they have people purchase from them. Sometimes they buy a whole or half, and then they go to the processor to pick them up. And that's the first time some people have experienced anything like that, going to the processor. Now, a friend posted this week on Facebook that when he was a kid and heard, "This little piggy went to market," he thought the pig went shopping. Comments were hilarious. From "I thought the same" to "Don't tell me any different, I still believe that." My daughter and family live in Comanche County, and every few years they have the 5th graders come out to tour the farm. This is in rural Kansas, a community of less than 500 people. Some of these kids have never been up close and personal to a cow or a hog or a chicken. There are children who believe that milk comes from the grocery store, who never knew that popcorn comes on a cob, who believe, like I was told by my grandfather, who knew better, that chocolate milk comes from a brown cow. There are many who still are not aware of all what happens to get the food to the table, and how related we are to the earth, the sun, the rain, the growers, the producers, and the processors of our food. I remember, as a layperson sitting in the pew, having a visiting missionary come lead worship one Sunday in Salina, asking the folks in the congregation how many, in their busyness to get to church that day, in the busyness of getting showered and dressed, of getting kids up and ready for church, of getting breakfast cooked and gobbled down, and everyone out the door, how many stopped to thank God for that Sunday morning breakfast? Were we too busy, too distracted, too unthinking to thank God for Sunday morning breakfast? I know that my family didn't have grace before breakfast that day. Too busy, too distracted, too unaware to thank God. So, I have a Thanksgiving gift for you today, The Art of Eating Mindfully. Did that get in the bulletin? Okay, if you want to pull it out. This is a way of eating silently at the table, a way to be aware of the great blessing our food is before us. And I'm not going to go through all of it, but the idea is to eat mindfully, to eat intentionally, to be aware of what you're doing, what we're doing when we sit down at the table, to maybe close our eyes at first and just center ourselves and be there at the table. Find a place inside that offers a sense of peace before we go about our eating. And then begin to welcome our food with a joyful, thankful smile. Open our eyes and look at the feast before us. We can smell the food and enjoy the color, the size, the shape, the sound. Thinking of that apple pie, how good it is to look at an apple pie. While eating, appreciate all that it took to make that food happen. The sun, the rain, the earth, the people, the hands that put that on the table. And then after eating, people are invited to close their eyes again and to remain in their center. Be aware that the body is starting to process the food. It's a natural thing. What we're eating, let go of its life, whether it's a potato or a cow, to enter into our lives, and the food becomes us. And then we can recognize the people around the table, whether it's somebody right there at the table or one of the great cloud of witnesses that's present with us, and be thankful for those other people in our lives, or be thankful for the next meal that we will share with somebody else. To eat together is to receive one another. Take a moment to just surround the people with love. that are with us. And then we open our eyes and we go on with Thanksgiving about the rest of our day. Now, we would practice this out at the retreat center. The very first time I did it, there was a group of about 6 there, and I thought, this is a great time to try this for the first time. If you ever do this, I suggest you do not serve Frito salad on metal plates. Don't have a silent meal. A Frito salad with all the crunching that it takes on metal plates with all the clanging of the forks on the plates. It was the loudest silent meal I ever had. I learned from that experience. It was fun. We laughed. I did it once with a woman, just one woman. We sat at the table and ate together. Not Frito salad on metal plates. And when we finished, we took a moment to talk about the experience and what it was like for her. She was from Wichita. She lived in an apartment. And she was actually in the main house where I lived, and there was lots of color in my house. And she realized for the first time how much the white walls of her apartment were impacting her in a negative way. And being surrounded by all the color in my house, she decided in that moment that she was going to paint the apartment. And then she could paint it white again before she left again. But she realized that there was something she needed in her life. And in that moment, it was color. So you never know what might come out of having a silent, mindful meal. So I invite all of us to not leave Thanksgiving for our food, for what gives us life, for what sustains our lives, and helps us build community to just one day a year, to Thanksgiving Day. Thanksgiving Day. May we recognize every meal as a meal at the Lord's table, and be thankful, and be thankful, and be thankful. Amen.